Today on Talk with Claude, we asked Paul Elam to tell us about his book, Men-Women Relationships.
You read the book, you know that all the way through, I hold men's feet to the fire. There is no victims, there's only volunteers. You must take responsibility for who you choose. And if your only standard is whether or not she's got a nice ass and she likes you, you're begging for problems.
Go through hell before you wisen up very often.
And my hope for the book is that you don't have to, that you really can learn from other people's mistakes. And I think probably most men will go through some levels of hell to learn, but any knowledge that you can grasp onto and use in the meantime can save you sometimes, because some of the consequences of bad relationships, one consequence is death. Incarceration is another consequence of a bad relationship. Poverty, being stripped of all your assets, having everything taken from you. This happens all the time. So what I challenge men to do, and one thing I don't do that feminists do, feminists paint this victim narrative of women. Oh, poor us, we're put upon. You read the book, you know that all the way through, I hold men's feet to the fire. There is no victims, there's only volunteers. You must take responsibility for who you choose. And if your only standard is whether or not she's got a nice ass and she likes you, you're begging for problems. There's got to be more to them than that.
I have a saying that there's biology, right? So men are attracted by visual cues, fair enough, and women are attracted by a man's capacity to provide for her and the children when she's incapacitated by childbirth and childbearing. But philosophy trumps biology, where, okay, well, that may be the basis, but you've got to build on that. It can't just be that. If a woman goes into a relationship with nothing to offer but her vagina, that's not a very good basis for a relationship. Same with the man. If you're only good so long as you provide money, well, the minute she finds somebody that provides more of it, or you lose your job, you're done. And the type of anxiety that can create in a relationship where you have the feeling where you're just holding by a thread all the time, that's a horrible place to be in.
And for most women too, and this is a real bitter pill for men to swallow, is that what they find attractive in a life mate, somebody who will take care of them and see them through hard times and make sure that they're provided for, is not the same thing as they look for in a sexual partner. Women are still attracted sexually based on physical characteristics, and it's how we get into the realm of cuckoldry. Of you pick the wrong woman and she will have great sex with you up until you're married, and then she'll have great sex with somebody else while you're taking care of her. And there's a lot of women that do that. There's an awful lot of women that do that. And I know guys I know men like the back of my hand. They're out there saying, no, oh no, not my cupcake. She wouldn't do that to me. No way. Yes, she would. And she has. In all likelihood, you've got to strive to be the exception. That's what all this is about. That's what I think taking red pills is about being different and being conscious. And if you don't pick somebody that has no values, I made a point of that in one of the essays in the book with a little meme, girl with a beautiful ass, perfect ass. And the family courts and the psychology establishment and the self-help gurus and all these people would love to thank you for checking out that ass without checking out her morals and integrity. And this is men's greatest enemy. And then they end up a lot of times, to be fair, and again, I don't cut slack for this stuff. You hear guys on the internet, some of maybe a small percentage of the MGTOW population, a very vocal percentage, oh, women are all the same. They're all bitches. They're all terrible. Yeah, the ones you chose without exercising values turned out that way. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because that's usually my response to women saying men are all the same. Yeah, the men that you chose are all the same. You're right. And until you change, they'll always be the same. But there are good men and there are good women. I see people always excusing, you say, well, you want to choose somebody with values, with virtue. Oh, everybody's got problems. That's kind of the lesser way of saying it. Sure, everybody's got problems, but if you always pick the people with the same problems and you don't work on what your values are, you're going to have always that impression that everyone has problems and it just happens to be you.
Yeah, it's funny how egalitarian people can get when you pinpoint them down on exactly what they're doing wrong. Oh, yeah, everybody does that. Yeah, okay. In other words, you want to do it some more.
Yeah, if everybody around you has problems, maybe you're it. You're the problem.
Well, oh, yeah. And again, that's one of the things when, and I'll just throw this out as a piece of advice. Too much information, especially too much negative information too soon from a woman on a date, if she hasn't gotten through the appetizer before she starts talking about what a bastard her ex was and what a bastard her father was, and the ex before that, now he was the real bastard. You know something? It's only a matter of time before you're one of the bastards that she's talking about to somebody else. If you understand that up front, it's over. The minute you see that, the minute you see this self-indulgent, pitiful, poor me, I've been put upon by all the men in my life. But what do men do typically? They think, oh, I'll be different for her. I'll show her that some men are good. Yeah, you guys know you've done that shit. Yeah, so have I.
Well, as a young blue pill man, that's exactly what it triggers, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to be the white knight that's going to save you from all these bad men, and I'm going to be different. Next thing you know, you're not the white knight, you're the slave.
That's very astute of you to pick up. That is precisely the intention of telling you her poor hard luck story, is to put you up on a pedestal as the savior and to make you feel compelled to be extra, extra, extra good to her because of all these other men who have been so bad. Guys, it's a worm on a hook. That's all it is. There's nothing else to it.
And I'd like to touch on the origin of that, and you do cover that in your book to some extent, is, for me, who was from a broken family where I saw my mother destroy everything. I mean, my dad earned a good salary. We had a nice house, and then, I watched that all crumble apart. If you displease a woman, it's disaster. It's a nuclear bomb in your home life. It's a lot worse than people make it out to be because it's so common, I think. And if you've gone through that, then you know not to displease a woman. And if you have a woman that says, oh, my ex was like this, my ex was like that, that's why it didn't work. Well, the minute you find yourself being even tempted to go down that road, you're like, oh, I remember what she said about that, even if it's just subconscious, and you're like, it keeps you on track. It's a very manipulative technique that's out there. Once you're red pill, you're like, see ya. That's one of your first clues.
There's your difference between a blue pill man and a red pill man. A blue pill man will hear that and he'll get on his white horse and say, never mind, fair Nell, I will take care of everything. You don't have to worry about anything. And a red pill man will say, bye, bitch. End of story.
Yeah.
Guess who won't be taken to the cleaners? Up to you guys.
I know you've talked about this a little bit, but let's go deep into the subject. You've got a part of a chapter on men that's called Why Men Think with Their Dicks. And it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title to it. So in there you talk about reproductive programming and how men and women sort each other out, and the typical attitudes towards this reality that should be a proper response instead of the blue pill response, let's say. So if you could deepen that for us a little bit.
Well, the main point of that piece was to point out to women that the very thing that they played on in men, and this is, women, you hear them complain all the time. Men only think with their dicks. They only want one thing. And my point is, yeah, that is the way men are pretty much wired. That's the way, a species reproduces and doesn't become an evolutionary dead end, is because there's a very strong sex drive in it. And in this case, it's the men who have the active part of that drive. It's not that women's sex drive is any less, but the fact of the matter is, this is what women play to manipulate men. This is their source of power. They know men want into the sacred netherlands of their womanhood, and so they decide, well, I can get this, I can get the protection, I can get provision, I can get a guy to behave the way I want him to, because he'll do anything pretty much to get in. And then they complain about this source of power for them. This is a tremendous source of power for women. This is how women, what was it, Jeff Bezos' wife got $30 billion or so, $30 billion. And she was like an accountant for Amazon in the early days for a few months. And she ends up being the, I think, second richest woman on the planet, all because of men's sex drive. And when you boil it down to that, that's how women get what they, a lot of times. Now I'm not taking away from professional women, and I've mentioned that, I believe, in that particular essay. But the fact of the matter is that women get over big time because of men's mindless sex drive.
Well, and on the Jeff Bezos case that you just talked about, it just brought to mind a thought for myself during my parents' divorce. As a very young man, I think I must have been maybe 9 or 10 at the time. And I remember thinking, and maybe I was born to be eventual red pill, but I remember thinking, watching my mother take my father for everything he's got, and thinking, and my father used to work, he was a cardiovascular surgeon. He used to teach at the university, and he did research on top of that. He had general surgery. He was gone sometimes 3 days at a time. He'd come home for a few hours. The hospital would call him up, your patient's bleeding, off he went again. And I remember I was very proud of my father for the work he did. And we used to meet people that used to thank him, you saved my husband, you saved my children. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm never going to work hard like that. I'm never even going to try, because a woman can just come along and she'll take everything I have when I've spent so much time. And that's actually very sad, because I eventually went to university and I had the grades to go into medicine. And I made a conscious decision. It's like, no, I'm going to go off and be a raft guide and adventure tourism, because that's more fun. And what's the point of having money anyways? If half the population
didn't have enough of a masochistic streak to become a doctor.
No, but I think there's a lot of wasted potential in that as well. And it makes me sad sometimes when I see the medical field nowadays. I'm maybe a little less sad about it, because it certainly deteriorated quite a bit, and maybe that was a good choice for that reason. But it took me years to have the courage to start something that was my own motivation, where I want to be more than I've been told, just because of childhood fears that I hadn't worked through. So that, I think that needs to be said.
And that is a really good point too, because that's the other side of this coin. The tongue-in-cheek aspect of that particular essay was to tell women to quit whining about the thing that gave them such a decided advantage over men. And the other side of that was to challenge men to think, maybe thinking with your dick isn't such a great idea. Maybe it really doesn't serve you as well as you think. And knowing male biology, though, we know that men they're just like you said earlier, they're visually oriented, they are sexually oriented. We are literal, not in the literal legal sense, but we're sexual predators. We're hunters with eyes set straight forward, looking for it. Well, do that consciously, aware of your prey, aware of the pitfalls of where you're going, what kind of person they are, and you can have fun with it. You can have a great time with it and have a lot of fun. But the other side of that argument was to point out to men, you give up an awful lot just for the laziness of thinking with your dick without having any kind of holds barred or anything like that. It's not a good idea. It actually turns out to be quite a bad idea. As you ask anybody, I mean, you talk to a guy that's 21, he's going to say, yeah, old man, whatever. I ain't listening to you. But he'll come back and he'll email me when he's 40 saying, she took all my shit.
Yeah. No, you gave it to her.
Yep, you gave it to her. And the thing is, you don't have to give up all your shit in order to be sexually successful.
No, quite the contrary sometimes.
Protect yourself. All you have to do is be willing to be conscious of what you're doing, of your actions, of who you're with. And if you're with a raging borderline, she's going to come at you with a false allegation. Just a matter of time.
Yeah, I was actually,
might be hot.
This morning I was out mountain biking with a friend. She's a lady. We go mountain biking very often. She has that level of mountain biking that we fit well together. But I mean, to me, that's just a relationship, just one of the boys, right? And we started talking about, she started thinking about going out with this fella. And so I said, well, where are you at with that? And she's like, oh, he's like this and he's like that. And I look at her, I said, so what do you bring to the table? There was a silence.
I bet there was. There always is.
Followed by discussion. But I think it says a lot that the woman, if anything's wrong, it's like, well, the man, he wasn't enough like this, wasn't enough like that. And then when you look at what they bring to the table, man, there's often not that much there. If, you can find one that has a lot to offer. Certainly, in your book, you talk about, the lady could actually get out once in a while and help change a tire. I've got a woman that transfers bales of hay and shovels manure and puts on chains on the wheels.
They exist.
They do exist.
But you don't find them if you end up finding women that I think I put it in the book that all they bring to the table is an occasional blowjob and a wish list from Tiffany's. That's their contribution to a relationship. And the fact of the matter is, for most men in their younger years, that's just fine. If they have the money to keep up with them, they're just perfectly wonderful with that. But then these same guys invariably end up with a knife in their back, figuratively speaking, in the relationship, and they claim they don't know what happened. I never thought she would do that to me. And it's like, all she wanted was jewelry.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, this lady friend of mine, I said, well, you keep fit, you got a good little body. The next question is, how are you going to use it? Are you going to use it to manipulate your man to get what you want, and when you're displeased with him, you turn the tap off? Or is that actually part of the deal? He gets regular sex and love and attention, and you get whatever he brings to the table. And there was another pause,
because you're asking questions that most women never get challenged to even think about. The very idea of what do you bring to the table made her stop. She almost like, what did you ask me? What do I bring? And of course, the real answer for most of these women is, well, I bring my beautiful self.
Yeah.
I bring the royal me to the situation, and he should appreciate that by bringing all this free shit. Man, I'm telling you, if that's your idea of a relationship, and I would consider that a red flag. Guys should be asking that question that you asked her. Guys should be asking, what do you bring?
Yeah, well, I've got 2 boys, so they're definitely reading your book before they bring any woman into the house.
They should, absolutely.
They've got a good relationship. We keep them away from public school. They choose not to go to public school, and it's working out pretty good. And having that tie directly with your children makes a huge difference. They don't have a chance to get indoctrinated. They can think for themselves. I mean, a lot of teachers will say, "Oh, we don't teach you what to think. We teach you how to think." Bullshit. Yeah, you can think whatever you like so long as the same thing as everybody else.
Yep. Schools are nothing but factories of conformity.
So the next part of your book is, we went through on men, is on women. So before we keep going, let's say it again. Not all women are like that.
Okay, not all women are like that. We said it. Can we move on now?
We can move on, yeah. So in that section, I believe you start off by making some parallels between women and children. And you have a good little story about radio talk on your truck along the highway between some truckers. And I think it illustrates it very well. Now, I had a theory at one time. You can tell me what you think about that. I think part of women looking juvenile and acting juvenile is a bit of a shit test to see if the man can handle the children. But if the whole relationship is like that, you got a definite problem.
Well, part of the neoteny, I mean, this is that, you know, again, I wouldn't want to invite Freud into the conversation because I don't know how much I would like what he would have to say about it. But part of the neoteny, the feigned adolescence, the eye makeup that accentuates big eyes that are spaced far apart, almost like animated Disney characters. I talk about this in the article that I shared with Peter Wright that made it into the book. That neoteny, that adolescent mimicking, is a sexual attractor for men. Men like young women of reproducing age. That's the way we're wired. You can take it up with, you know, God or Darwin as you please, but that is the reality of it. And women learn to use that to great effect.
It certainly triggers that white knight instinct, eh? You got to help, you got to do stuff for a child.
It triggers the parental brain. There's an actual name for it. Matter of fact, there's a huge book. I dabbled in parts of it as a text way too far for me to bother reading, but I got the basics from it about the parental brain, and that when we see these representations of youth or representations of helplessness or representations of being wounded, particularly in men, we have a state of being parentified. We become the caring parent at this visual sight. And it makes it very difficult for us to say no to anything. That's why you will see grown women, 30 fucking years old, put up a little tear in their eye and say, "Can I please do this?" And I mean, just seeing that nowadays makes me want to throw up when I see a grown woman talk that way. But they mimic children because it triggers men to give them their way. And it's very effective.
Yeah, and I saw somewhere that even that tearing and the crying actually releases some Fey hormones that within proximity can have quite an influence and taper down the anger and the violence and has some repercussions, like some hormonal repercussions on the man.
Testosterone drops in men in the presence of women's tears. Their testosterone level goes down. It makes them more gentle, more docile, more compliant.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the survival mechanism from a biological point of view, but to be aware of it, I think, is definitely an advantage.
Oh, sure you can. And you can also see how men get totally taken to the cleaners. I mean, there are women who operate online using fake pictures. I'm sure that some of them behind their internet persona are 800 pounds, are probably men too, but they use fake personas online. And they will tell men, "I want to come see you and have sex with you, but I don't have plane fare. So please send me money." And there's thousands and thousands, countless guys out there that'll send money. And they'll say, "Oh, I missed the plane. I want to take it again. Can you send me some more money?" And the guy will do it. This is how bad men are at this stuff, is that there is a certain segment of the male population that is just easily dupable. And there's a very small percentage of the male population who doesn't buy any of it. And I think that's what we call red pill.
She did it to me 20 times, and then I learned.
Yeah, and if she does it once more, I'm going to quit her for good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's pathetic. It's really pathetic, and it makes me feel for men, but it doesn't make me feel sorry for them. Guys need to wake up, and they need to grow up. This is a matter of maturity, too. Are you so addicted to the approval of a woman you've never met who lives in Latvia, for fuck's sake, that you're willing to give up all your money? And I've read tons of horror stories about guys that are duped by Russian women online out of tons and tons of money, women they never met. This is powerful, powerful stuff. And to my money, red pills are the only antidote to it. There has never been a school of thought in human history ever that really addresses the core of these problems. And that's, again, what I think the book has to offer. It's not going to solve all your problems, it's not going to fix you overnight, but it'll sure give you a pathway to get there if you're willing and if you're determined. It will absolutely do that.
Now, as a blue pill man, even, there was something that always confused me a little bit. And this was the myth of the woman's sexual peak. Even as a blue pill man, I could never swallow that one. And as a red pill man, it just makes me laugh because I see what they're doing and it's hilarious. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit. I know you cover it in your book, and I think it's important to demystify that because that's just the worst kind of bullshit.
And mind you, I get to say this as an old fart, so I'm making fun of myself along with everybody else. But to me, there's nothing more hysterically funny than a woman with crow's feet and sagging tits looking me dead in the eye and telling me I'm in my sexual prime. No, you're not, sweetheart. You're not by a long shot. You haven't been in your sexual prime since you were 19. That's just life. But it's just another one of these sort of like, mothers have the hardest job in the world. It's just another one of these crazy ass lies that women tell themselves and that men sit there like bobbleheads and nod their heads to. Oh yes, of course. Being a mother is much harder than being a coal miner. Women tell themselves all manner of lies about their lives, that being 44 is in their sexual prime, that being a mother is the hardest job in the world, that women have to work twice as hard as anybody else in order to be recognized for their work. All of that, massive amounts of bullshit, absolutely stupendous, mountainous levels of bullshit. And women tell these lies and men sit around and say, oh yeah, that's true. Of course it is. Whatever you say, darling, can we have sex now? So long as you're in your sexual prime.
So what's actually happening there at that sexual peak that they talk about? There's something happening there.
Last gasp for sexual relevance. They're horny because when they're fucking, they're reminded they have sexual viability. When a man is still able to get an erection from being with them, that means they're sexually relevant. So just as the ovaries start to die, and just as the light sexually is about to go out in them, they're raging against the dying of the light and calling it sexual relevance. All it is a sexual death rattle. But what can I say? That's life as it is. And that's another one of the
So it gives them the same boost as a like on Facebook.
What's that?
They're getting one more like on Facebook.
Oh yes, one more like on Facebook. You're going to have to settle for putting up a 20-year-old picture and getting likes on that because you're not in your 40s in your sexual prime. You're just looking to be relevant. And you know what? More power to you. More power. Stay relevant. Stay sexual. It's a great thing. Enjoy it. You don't need to create an entire line of bullshit around the idea of being in your sexual prime in order to confirm the fact that you still count in life. And this is one of the things that women do to themselves mercilessly. I get really frustrated with women who sit around and complain about, the male beauty standard and all this stuff. It's sort of like women can't look at a magazine without their self-esteem dropping. They can't look at a more attractive woman without becoming jealous and resentful. Gosh, I'm glad. It's one of the reasons I'm glad I'm a male. I mean, there's always going to be a ton of guys more buff than me, better looking, everything, more money, the whole 9 yards. But women just seem to have an inability in them to cope with the fact that not everybody's equal without it becoming something to destroy them.
And I would say, like we said before, not all women are like that. I would think that it's even more important or relevant to women that have decided that that's the only thing they have to bring into a relationship, right?
And that is exactly what it's saying, that the only thing they're worth is their sexual viability, and that without it, they're nothing. It confirms the deepest feelings of misogyny in women. And when men typically do not see them that way.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of projection there.
Yeah. I know women that are in their 50s and 60s that command respect and admiration from all kinds of people around them, men and women alike. But they are the exception. Most women, especially when they feel their sexual relevance fading, become angry and riddled with denial about what's happening. And it's a sad thing to see.
And I would even add that when you actually meet a woman that's built her life around more than her sexuality and has a lot to bring to the community, to the family, to people around her, it by far puts a shadow on anything else around. It eclipses anybody.
Absolutely.
Putting, the famous selfie pictures up here from above so I can see her a bit of cleavage and all that. It becomes so irrelevant. So I think that's important to say, that there's definitely more that women can do to make themselves relevant than just their sexuality and claiming that it's their sexual peak when they're just a dying ember at that point.
Well, I tell you what, that is a good way to check women out, though, about where their heads are at, is go look at their Facebook pages. If 90% of their photos, they're standing with their lips pursed and stuck like that, doing that stupid look on their face, like I'm so hot.
Yeah.
If you're one of the guys that looks at that and says, "Ooh, wow, she's hot," you deserve her.
Go for it, buddy.
Go for it. She's your woman.
So you have some fairly stern words for daddies. So all this female behavior and dysfunctionality has, in my opinion, and probably in yours as well, has a lot to do with expectations that women have. And those expectations are built from the moment that they see how their daddy treats them. And once again, we could invite Freud into the conversation, but let's run with that. Maybe you can describe that for us.
Yeah, I did talk at some length about that. And I talk about the fathers that I have spoken with about these issues with young women. And almost to a man, I mean, one of the difficulties in this was that it's one thing when you talk about women in general with men, but when you talk about daughters, fathers of daughters tend to personalize it very, very quickly. And almost every man, and I'm talking dozens of men that I had this conversation with, I was testing the waters to see how it went, ended up saying, when I talked about the way that fathers, in a very unhealthy way, enabled the narcissism and sense of entitlement in their daughters by being the daddy part of Daddy's Little Princess, and by giving them everything they wanted and never being able to say no, and nothing's too good for my little girl, all the way up to the point that they're, telling young teenage boys that they have a shotgun in their closet because if anybody dares lay a finger on her, and they don't want to see her as sexual. That taps into enough reality for most fathers that most of them said, wait a minute, you're not talking about me and my daughter, are you? And they did not want to hear that I was. And I was quite honest in the book, and I said I lied to them because I wanted my conversation for research. I didn't want to turn it into a fist fight. But that's how emotional these men got. And I can only suspect that they were emotional because I was striking a nerve. That there really is. Men set their daughters up to be impossible to please. And they're absolutely, on a Freudian level, very blatant about it. They'll tell their daughters, I want you to pick a guy just like daddy. Daddy's got to approve. He's got to, pass all these tests. And of course, he can't really pass a test because daddy doesn't ever want her to grow up. He wants to keep her a little girl. And by God, he succeeds at it. And so they go out in life as little girls into relationships, expecting men to perpetuate them as little girls and to give them their way about everything. And it's a terribly sick situation. Fathers are, I think, probably the strongest culprit next to feminism. They're the strongest, biggest culprit behind female entitlement that we have by being normal fathers, by being loving fathers, because they don't tell their daughters no. They may not.
Quite frankly, that's to the detriment of potential boyfriends. But if they're smart at all, they can always walk away. It's mostly to the detriment of those women that have crazy expectations, and then
they're never happy.
Can never live up to that expectation.
And what these men don't understand is that when you satisfy somebody at every turn, when you're constantly giving them what they want, when they can just crawl up in your lap and wrap their little arms around you and say, Daddy, give me this or give me that, and you always do it, you are setting them up to be miserable human beings. Because men will start relationships that way, but they get tired of it. They do. It wears them out. And eventually, no matter how infatuated a guy is in the beginning, at some point, he's going to get tired of it. There's a meme floating on the internet. Most people have seen it that says, no matter how beautiful she is, somebody somewhere is tired of putting up with her shit. And that can be your daughter if that's what you're raising. And it's a terrible thing because these women are unnecessarily made miserable if they were taught delayed gratification, if they were taught the word no, if they were taught, when you're married someday or when you're in a relationship with a boy, you need to bring something to the table. You can't just expect him to treat you like some guy's daddy would, and really tell them and teach them lessons. They're hard when they're young, but the fact of the matter is when they're adults, it gives them a shot at happiness. They can take care of themselves, and they don't have crazy expectations of men to come in and play the role of daddy. And it's very sad when I see it.
If they're still acting like a little child too, that means they're dependent. If you're dependent, then you end up entering into a codependent relationship instead of an interdependent relationship where two adults choose to be together because it's better for both of them. And a codependent relationship is just a disaster waiting to happen.
And hostile dependency is, I think, one of women's greatest nightmares in the relationship. They end up hating the men that they depend on to live. And if you hate the source of your support, can you imagine anything more difficult to adjust to than being dependent on something that you hate? And
the classic one is, he's away all the time working, he doesn't care about me, and he hasn't bought me a fur coat in over a year. How do you square those two things together? I'll never understand. And this is a quote directly from my mother. So
really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and that is your mother's not unusual.
It's typical.
It is very typical, yes. He's always away working. He never comes home, and he hasn't bought me a new Maserati. There are tons of women that do this, and there are a lot of men, way too many, who see this as normal, who hear these things, and their thought in their head, okay, well, how do I juggle a few more hours out, both at work and home, and get her that fur coat and sort of play this, and instead of going, wait a fucking minute, what am I doing? You know, women, you can buy your own fur coat. You can go out and work if fur coat's that important to you. And after you paid your half of the bills in a home, then go out and get yourself a fur coat. Buy yourself a dozen really expensive roses. Do all kinds of things for yourself. Go to Kay and kiss yourself. But leave men alone.
Yeah, and I can already hear the younger, prettier women who might accidentally fall upon this podcast thinking, well, if he won't get me this or that, I'll just move on to the next Joe and get it from him, right?
Yeah, those girls quit listening the first 5 minutes. And guess what? Those girls, when they do that, they're doing you a favor. That's the biggest favor a woman can do. If she just has that wish list from Tiffany's, if that's her objective, is to get out of you everything. If you have two brain cells to rub together, you want her to move on. You'll work toward getting her out of your life as quickly as possible, as soon as you realize who and what she is. And again, this goes back to men. We can sit here and complain about women are materialistic, they're shallow, they're bitches, they lie. Yeah, whatever. You know, I never had anybody in my life hurt me who I didn't allow it to happen. That's all there is to it.
That's one of the most important realizations, that you always have a choice. Volunteers.
You do have a choice, and you've got a responsibility too. It's real important. There's nobody was put on earth to take care of any of us. We do have to take care of ourselves. And women have a terrible time learning that. I mean, so many of them never will. Men at least have an advantage, and they have the capacity to learn that.
So I think this leads right into the concept of hypergamy, which you cover in the book, which is a term that we hear a lot in the red pill movement, but that might be new to a lot of blue pill mainstream gobbing people that might fall upon this. So why don't we try to break that down for them?
Okay, well, hypergamy in its purest form just simply means it's the practice of marrying up. It's a practice of women marrying somebody of equal or greater social status than them, or financial status, and the practice of men marrying somebody of equal or lesser financial status.
And that's a typically female trait. Like in an example that I've heard, you can totally imagine the local doctor, going to the grocery store and finding a cute little clerk at the grocery store to fall in love with and make a life with and save her from her dreadful days at the grocery store.
Unless the doctor's female.
Well, that's it. You're very unlikely to find the same thing if the doctor happens to be female and the person working as a grocery clerk is a male. And I think that's good for biology, because if the salary in the home depends entirely on the woman, then that prevents reproduction to some extent, because that means, when she's not working and she's taking care of the baby, there's nobody to bring in the cash. So there's a biological reason for that to be there, right?
Yes, and it's been codified in many cultures, particularly in Indian culture. There's, I don't know whether it's still the case, but I know for a great long period of time, it was illegal not to have a hypergamous marriage. A woman could not marry to a lower class and a man. But I think even more importantly, that we've taken the concept of hypergamy in the red pill community and expanded it to